This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We are so excited to have the live listeners with us, and we are so grateful for you downloading this program, even if it's after the fact. If you can at some point join us live, we would love to have you join us live. We're usually on Wednesday nights. I do want to say this. We may have a little bit, just a preemptive, we may have a little bit of a scheduling issue next week because it's Halloween, and I have a little guy, and Scott has a little guy. So we may have to go take those guys out trick-or-treating. So we may do a Tuesday or Thursday night podcast. We'll try and work around that. It is the bye week, so hey, you know, we're going to kind of be a little lax next week too. But that doesn't mean we won't have much to talk about. We'll still have stuff to talk about. But just going to let you know we might not record Wednesday night live next week. It might be a Tuesday night or a Thursday night at this point. That's probably what we're looking at. So keep it to @Bengals OBI on Twitter for the information on that. Or if you just don't hear about it, it'll be on the feed, and you can continue to download this program as you usually do on iTunes, on YouTube, on Stitcher, on Google Play, at CincyJungle.com, and at Art19. So appreciate all of that. We're going to get to some listener questions. You can call or text in 949-542-6241, 949-542-6241. And we will try and get to your questions as we can, call or text. We do have an email question already that was sent to us from our a regular listener of ours, and quite apropos because it's from Michael Myers as we are on the precipice of Halloween. Michael Myers has an email that says, "Hi," it's a little lengthy, so I'm going to try and get to the meat of it. "Hi, Anthony. Just wanted your opinion on this, and no, it's not due to the loss of the Chiefs, but more about the past few seasons and an article I read today. Could we see another exodus like the Raiders are doing anytime soon?" Now, in case you missed it, both the Raiders and the Giants appear to be in fire sale mode. Could we see a mass exodus of players? We've seen the Bengals do this already with Chad, Carson, TJ in 2010. The Raiders have given up, but did acquire 3 first-round picks in the next 3 years. He mentions the Browns. Could we see Andy Dalton, Green, Burfict, Kirkpatrick, and others be on the outs due to age and a season that is not looking good? Not to mention Marvin's lack of success. So I'm going to tell you this. Gino and Carlos Dunlap will probably not be in this conversation because they just signed extensions this offseason. But there are other stars that could be. And you never know. I don't think this is in the DNA of an Andy Dalton or an A.J. Green, but you never know about disgruntled guys in terms of losing to the Steelers, all of that. I don't think the Bengals are usually conservative. They don't really do that, but if they get an offer on the table and they see it declining, the thing is Carson wanted out. Their hand was forced there. Chad was declining and he was disgruntled. Their hand was somewhat forced there. Keith Rivers was another guy that was a high pick that they just kind of said, dude, we got to get rid of this guy and get what we can. I still think that, Andy, AJ, all those guys, Andy has his ups and downs, but he's been playing relatively well this year. These guys still are playing well and are probably plateauing at this point.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that email from Michael Myers, John?
So the thing about the Raiders and the Giants specifically is that John Green signed a 10-year contract. Pat Shurmur was also a new head coach this year. Those are 2 brand new regimes that both organizations are thinking long term, and obviously both of them have been at 1 win on the season. They're kind of in similar positions where they're basically tanking, even if they won't say they are tanking. And the head coaches want to get clear the roster out of guys that they didn't initially bring in, get whatever assets they can to kind of build their own versions of the team, specifically with the Raiders. Gruden's already thinking about Vegas. He's not thinking about the next year in Oakland at this point anymore. Next year is basically, a watch. He's thinking about 2020. He's thinking about playing in that brand new stadium in Las Vegas. And if he can get anything for players that he doesn't see in their long-term vision, then he's going to basically get whatever he can. I don't think that's similar for the Bengals, because Marvin Lewis is on a 2-year contract. I do believe that there is some light at the end of the tunnel for the end of that tenure that he's on. And I don't think that the situations are comparable, because it's not exactly a new tenure ahead of Marvin, and these are kind of still his guys. So I don't think the situations are quite comparable. And plus, the Bengals don't really do this often. So I just don't think that it's likely to happen because of those reasons.
Yeah, and the key phrase there, his guys, quote unquote. And I think when John Gruden took over the Raiders, even though Khalil Mack's a stud, he didn't draft him, all that kind of stuff. And I think he felt as if he got a big loot there, and didn't couldn't pass it up. Whatever. Amari Cooper, they got another first-round pick. Scott, I don't know if you heard the entire email from listener Michael Myers, but basically the crux of it is, could the Bengals be engaging in a fire sale at some point? Now, they're in kind of a tricky window because the trade deadline's on the 30th, and the Bengals are still 4-3 right in the mix of the AFC North, whereas the Raiders, one of the teams mentioned, and then we mentioned the Giants and other teams that are engaging in fire sales. They're not in the mix. They're collecting picks and trying to get as many high picks as possible. But could we see at some point, if this team goes 6-10 or what have you, could we see this team potentially trade some of its stars, AJ Green, Andy Dalton, like they did with Carson, Chad, etc.?
I'm going to say no for 2 reasons. One would be just the simple fact that I just don't think they are creative enough to do something like that, to intentionally. They don't seem to have the mindset. I mean, John mentioned earlier, as far as like them trading and using picks like within the draft, and they just don't seem to have that mindset of thinking beyond. Okay, we grab our picks, can't think of the word right now. Compensatory picks.
Yeah.
I just don't see them having the forward-thinking mindset to say, "Hey, let's think a little forward." The reason I don't see it is because both Marvin Lewis and owner Mike Brown are on something of a ticking clock. Mike Brown is an older man. His brother has passed away at a younger age. His dad passed away at a really young age. I would have to assume he probably feels he's not going to be around for another 80, 90 years. And I think that's part of the reason why he's kept Marvin Lewis, because he kind of knows, I don't want to have to go through that rebuild. I want to try to get a championship while I still can. So I don't see him blowing it up, doing anything, replacing coaches, anything crazy. And obviously Marvin is on he's kind of stayed beyond where he probably should have, but I don't see him doing anything either, because unless you're on a 10-year deal, like, you mentioned with John Gruden, where you have that security, without that, that job security, there's really nothing, there's no benefit for you to tank for the next guy. You're not going to, no one's going to say, yeah, I'm in this temporarily, I'll go ahead and tank. So you can get a bunch of picks and get a bunch of future guys that the next guy can win with. Usually, coaches aren't that altruistic. They tend to be a little more selfish as far as, what can I do? Build my legacy, build my wins, even if it doesn't help the future, because I'm looking at right here, right now. So for those reasons, I would be very surprised to see them do anything more than just like one random trade.
Yeah, and the 2010 and 2011 draft classes have really shaped the success of the Bengals in recent years. Kevin Zeitler was a successful guy in the 2012 draft, and Eifert had his moments. Perfect has had his moments, but even though he was undrafted. But really, those first 2 classes have netted the most stars. Those 2010, 2011 classes have netted the most stars. And as we mentioned earlier, the other high picks have not really pulled the same weight as those picks. So if the Bengals do engage in a fire sale, they sure as hell better get guys that can impact the game right away. We do have a call on the line. It is from our good friend John from Kentucky. First of all, thanks, Michael Myers, for your email. And John from Kentucky, how are you, sir?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Anthony. And you guys do a great job on this podcast.
Thank you.
And, hey, this weekend, this is going to be a good game coming up against Tampa Bay because the Bengals are not strong enough right now to dominate Tampa Bay. I don't think Tampa Bay is really going to come into Cincinnati and embarrass the Bengals. I think we're going to have a really close game, maybe a really wild game. So I think it's going to be very entertaining. And bear in mind, too, we got humiliated by the Chiefs, but we had just played Pittsburgh. And normally, after we've just played Pittsburgh, the game after, we don't do that well. How many times have we gone to the playoffs and we just played Pittsburgh the week before and Baltimore, and we're tired, we're half beat up, we look terrible. I mean, this is the AFC North, and the position the Bengals are in, regardless of who owns them or who coaches them, this is a smash mouth division, and people get hurt in this division. And I don't know why. What's going on? We've lost 3 tight ends. What is it about playing tight end for the Bengals that is one of the most dangerous occupations in the United States?
Yeah, I don't know there, John. It's hard to explain, but I think that.
You're still there, Andy?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know there, John. I think that unfortunately. I think tight end in general is just a dangerous position in the NFL because you're asked to block a lot of times similar to a tight end, but you're also asked to go across the middle and take some big hits. I mean, Rob Gronkowski, known as the best tight end in the NFL, is on the injury report almost every week and missing games all of the time. So, I mean, I don't think it's just a Bengals thing, but I do think that it's just a dangerous position to play. I do appreciate your upbeat nature, and I do appreciate your good point that you made about the AFC North and what that entails. Obviously, now there's been a Roger Goodell in this last couple of years has made kind of a mandate that schedules pretty much usually end on an important divisional game because they don't like to see teams do that rest your starters type of thing. They want to see the ratings and all of that. And have games matter until the very last week of the season. So I think that's part of it. But Scott, your thoughts on John's comments? And John, we're gonna get you off the air real quick before we do though. Prediction for Sunday. I see a lot, like you said. I see a fun game, but maybe one with a lot of wacky turnovers and interesting plays. Your quick prediction on Sunday against the Buccaneers.
I will say Cincinnati in overtime. 27-24.
Interesting. I like it. Okay. Well, we'll get you off the air, John. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Who day? John, your thoughts on what John from Kentucky said?
Yeah, I think they would do better playing the week after they play the Steelers if they actually beat the Steelers for once. I think it's more of just a morality thing with constant defeat kind of gets you down, and that 1 week turnaround can be sometimes a little bit too quick. And to John's point, they have played the Steelers on week 17 a few times when they went to the playoffs, and obviously they didn't do well. And I don't think that's specifically just a Steelers issue or playing the Steelers issue, but you can't tell me with a straight face that these players aren't sick and tired of losing to the Steelers, and how that doesn't somehow take a toll that can carry on for the rest of the week. When you're practicing, you're still thinking about the game. You might not be focused completely on the next team. So yeah, if they did fine against the Steelers, if they were in the Steelers position, they wouldn't have a problem. It's just mainly just constantly losing to them rather than just playing them and getting beat up after the game, I think.
Yeah, I think part of it too might just be the team they play. And I don't know why there's certain teams that the Bengals, when they play, they shouldn't struggle against, or that, certain team, like, you obviously should beat this guy, and they never seem to. And this isn't exactly what John was asking about, but when they played the Buccaneers, it just seems like that is a team that, for whatever reason, the Bengals, I don't know if they overlook it. And it's different coaches, different players.
Yeah.
Right.
But you go back they had lost like 6 or 7 in a row until last year, and like the last few, they had a better record. They lost by a point when Tampa Bay came back and outscored them back in 2006. In 2010, they were winning. They gave up a halftime lead, got beat by 3 points. The next time when they played in 2014, the Bengals had a much better record. Tampa Bay was 2-10. The Bengals barely held on to win that one. They were, half a minute to go. Tampa Bay was driving down the field, and they were able to stop them on a completed 4th and long where Tampa just came short. So for whatever reason, yeah, you have those teams that, and obviously, saying after you play a certain game, but I think probably a bigger thing in the NFL would be like a night game or a Monday game where you have that short week. I don't know if Sunday night would have been enough to make the Bengals not play as well, but I think that may be coupled with the fact that for whatever reason, Marvin's teams, when they play Tampa, just don't seem to play very well. So we can kind of look at the game and think, man, Tampa scores a bunch of points, but their defense is horrible. It should be high scoring, but I don't know. It's so hard to say because when these teams play, it's just, it almost looks like.
Remember that 2006 game with Justin Smith and that weird roughing the passer? It was like a 13-7 game. It was just something ridiculous. It was we're going way back into history there, but I don't know. John, you're laughing. I don't know if it's because you remember that game or okay.
Memory.
Okay.
Ugh.
Yeah, that was a disaster. Guys, we have another good friend on the line, Terrell from Cincinnati. Terrell, how are you, sir?
How you doing, sir?
Good. Good. We're doing well. I mean, 2 straight losses. We're doing all right. But how are you?
I know. Well, I just got a couple points. I just think that we just kind of got away from preseason to now. We kind of got away from like the mixture of like the young energized and the vets, and it kind of slowed down when they played against the big boys like the Steelers and the Chiefs and the Panthers. And really the 2 ones really was the Steelers and the Chiefs. And I believe like the Chiefs, the Steelers game, I think the defensive coordinator fumbled on that one, and that's what I think. And then the Chiefs game, I think the rookies panicked, and the vets kind of was lost a little bit, and initial defense coordinator too, and then reached a little bit of everybody just in sync, and then the third receiver, who's the third receiver, who's the second receiver, and it was a lot of stuff like that. But anyway, I just want to see Westerman at right guard, some playing time for Jefferson, and Jim Haslett as defense coordinator or defensive line coach. To try to, I ain't saying fire Terrell Hoffman, but you know him a little bit. Like that's all.
Well, a lot of good points there, Terrell. We're going to talk about him off the air with you, and you made some amazing points. Always appreciate you calling in. Continue to be a regular, sir. Appreciate it, and hopefully you get to win.
No problem. Y'all, this is the best Daniels channel on earth. I really get say y'all top 10 number 1. Good point. Everybody, I like the little game I was playing about the GM game. I don't know if y'all did it on purpose, but that's how I feel. Y'all what y'all was doing earlier.
Oh, nice. Well, I appreciate the compliment, man. You're welcome on here anytime. Appreciate it. And you brought up some great points that we're going to talk about tonight. There's a lot here from Terrell, and you can go to, obviously the coaching situation and possible changes there. I like what he said though about kind of the young guys and playing all that. John, I'm gonna start with you on this one because you do the weekly lineman on Cincy Jungle. You watch some tape. There's also a post on Cincy Jungle about snap distribution, and I thought Terrell brought up a good point about, hey, things were working against Miami, against Atlanta when, Willis isn't getting in the stat sheet, but he's in there. Sam Hubbard is making some impact plays here and there. Yet against the Chiefs and the Steelers, Cincinnati went with the veterans. They went with Michael Johnson. I I don't think they calculated it correctly, because I think Michael Johnson is still missing backfield tackles against Kareem Hunt as we sit here tonight. I mean, there were like 3 at least where I'm like, dude, wrap the guy up. And I love Michael Johnson. I love him as a guy. I love him in the locker room. I think he's a good rotational guy in this team, but still he gets the bulk of the snaps. When's that going to change? You look at Terrell also talked about Westerman. There's just this bullheadedness with Marvin Lewis and the staff, and I don't get it.
Yeah, and the Westerman issue has nothing to do with a veteran. It's Alex Redmond, who's a third-year undrafted guy. Lewis just has favorites, and that's just something that we've come to accept. And like, he's not just like Paul Alexander wasn't going to talk bad about Russell Bodine. Marvin Lewis isn't going to talk bad about Alex Redmond, so that's just something that we can just forget about, I guess. And I'm partially to blame because I brought it up earlier. But with Michael Johnson, I think it's more of just a thing about with Willis and Hubbard. I haven't been too impressed with either of those guys so far this year. And obviously Hubbard's a rookie. Willis is a second-year guy, and I expected to see some type of jump with him, and we haven't quite seen it yet. And I think that's partially to the reason why Johnson is still out there for more snaps than what we would like to see, because, we know what we're getting with him. We don't exactly know what we're getting with either Willis or Hubbard at this point. Hubbard's made some great splash plays, I'll give him that, but there's not been any realm or any sense of consistency with him. And with Willis, you would think that he'd be able to do the same thing as Johnson, but he just hasn't really put it all together yet. And I think that's still something that we need to see before we officially pound the table against Johnson. And to your point, like Vincent Gray is basically in the same boat as Johnson, right? Like, why he's out on the field getting really blown up on second level blocks, I just don't know. I don't know why you don't try someone else there. But specifically with Johnson and I guess Redmond, it's just that stubbornness, I guess, and it's just that bullish on certain guys that, in the middle of the season you'd like to see change, and it just doesn't happen under Lewis, I guess.
Yeah, and kudos to Rebecca Toback and our good friend Joe Goodberry, 2 very good follows on Twitter, as well as you, John. Scott, I'd mention you as a good follow on Twitter, but you're not the most omnipresent Twitter guy. But kudos to them in terms of them bringing up the amount of pressures that Alex Redmond has allowed this year. Alex Redmond's been okay in the run game.
Mm-hmm.
But he has given up. He is on pace to give up by far the most pressures that any offensive guard has given up in the NFL in the last handful of years. I think he's on pace for over 70 at this point right now, which is unbelievable. He had 6 against the Chiefs. Scott, you and I have been around these parts for a while. We've seen a lot of things. We've seen a lot of stubbornness from Marvin Lewis. I want you to touch on that point, but I also want to touch on another kind of caveat that Terrell sort of talked about, but didn't specifically mention. And that's Joe Mixon, because my thing is with this is you have injuries to Croft, Eifert, Gio, and Ross. I mean, you kind of got to say, okay, we were this, pass-happy offense the first 3-4 weeks, and we had all of these guys. Now we don't. Mixon still is showing, regardless, that he can be effective. Granted, it's mostly draws, delays, and things of that nature. So I want you to talk about a little bit about the stubbornness of Marvin Lewis and his reluctance to change some of these positions, but also Joe Mixon and the fact that they should be relying on this guy a bit more. The carries have dropped the past couple of weeks. They should be relying on this guy a bit more, especially with the injuries, right?
Yeah, and I think starting with that one, you look at the carries, he's averaging 12 yards, or not 12 yards a carry. That'd be pretty awesome. 12 carries a game the last couple of weeks. And the first three games, the first 2, and then the first one back from the injury, he had 17, 21, and 22. So right there around 20, all of a sudden it's dropping off. And the difference is in those other 2, they were losing. And it's almost like they just get away from what they're good at, what works. When they're losing, they tend to get away from, okay, we're just going to run the ball. We're going to run. We're going to trust this guy who is a very good runner when he has the ball. And the Pittsburgh game, he averaged like almost 6 yards a carry. And that's like when they played Pittsburgh last year, when it was early in the year, when he made that comment about how he's out playing Le'Veon Bell. And in that game, he did. In that game, I mean, he averaged, 6-7 yards a carry. You know, I had 5 carries and didn't touch it again in the second half and was upset about it. But it's just sometimes they just kind of get away from certain things that work. And that's kind of something I mentioned earlier about the adjustments. Like, you need to have someone on their staff, either someone who's actually a coach or someone with them that says, hey, you know, kind of slaps him with the wet towel or whatever and helps him get back, you know, reoriented or whatever it is. And then as far as the stubbornness thing, like you said, we've seen that quite a bit with him. And I think many fans heading into the preseason and into the regular season were kind of hopeful that Westerman would get a lot of playing time and get a legitimate chance to be a starter. And that's something that I think from the beginning of training camp, the Bengals were pretty adamant and kind of saying that this guy is not a starter. He's not a starter, even though he was great in preseason. And I know Pro Football Focus said he was great in preseason. And when fans saw him on, you know, in those games, he was great in preseason. And the Bengals were like, nope, it's either Hopkins or Redmond at right guard. This guy is just a backup. And, you know, for us who have been around a while, we've seen examples of that in the past. And the one that people who would be on the Westerman camp would be the most likely to call up is the whole Evan Mathis, Nate Livings thing, where whenever you saw them play, it's like, man, this Mathis guy's pretty good. And you watch Livings like, man, why do they keep running him out there? And they let Mathis go and he becomes an all-pro. But then there's also other times like Anthony Collins. When he was a Bengal, he was a left tackle. He subbed in occasionally for Andrew Whitworth when there were injuries or whatever. He looked decent. Like, wow, this guy looks pretty good. He looks like a good pass protector. I don't know why they don't put this guy on the line somewhere, let him start. So he hit free agency after his rookie contract. Tampa Bay signs him to a big contract, and Bengals fans are like, grr, you know, cursing it. How dare you let this guy get away? And Tampa Bay, I think, cut him before the year was out because he just wasn't as good as we thought he was. So it's really hard to know with Westerman until they give him a chance. You know, is he Evan Mathis and the Bengals are just being stubborn and, you know, clearly stupid? Or is he Anthony Collins and maybe they're seeing something at practice we don't see, and okay, he's good in flashes against, you know, lesser opponents or in like little brief periods, but at the end of the day, he's just not the lineman that, you know, fans think he is.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The Evan Mathis, Nate Livings thing, good God, that was just dude, really. And that's kind of what's frustrating here. You know, I mean, you kind of see some things, and I guess this is where both coaches and myself, I really respect Pro Football Focus. I really like the metrics. I really like it, but I don't love it. There are certain things where you kind of go, well, yeah. But, I mean, in the case of Redmond, they're counting pressures that he lets up, and he's ridiculous in terms of that. But the Bengals, this is what I don't understand. I think the Bengals really like the quote-unquote nastiness of Redmond, especially in the run game. But then we talk about Joe Mixon not getting enough carries. So if you're going to be a ground and pound team and you want to trot Redmond out there, fine, but run the ball. If you're gonna do that and trot him out there where pass protection is definitely not his forte, the stats show it, then that doesn't make sense to me. There could be a change coming back. Billy Price did practice Wednesday. We don't think he's going to play Sunday. We'll see. But there could be a change where either he or Trey Hopkins could maybe move to right guard. Trey Hopkins hasn't been great at center, but I think he's been better than most people thought. I kind of thought he'd be a borderline disaster. Secondary position, typical Bengals offensive line deal. Let's put a guy into a position that's a secondary position and start him, right? So that's my thing. And I think now, just because of the injuries and everything, I think that Joe Mixon kind of needs to be a guy that they rely on. And I think the stats show that the Bengals run most of their successful plays, John, you can corroborate this, out of the shotgun, and they run a lot of their successful run plays out of draws, delays, things like that, especially with Mixon and his patience to kind of find creases. They noted on Sunday Night Football where he, even Chris Collinsworth said he looks Le'Veon Bell-esque on some of these runs where he's just waiting and finding the hole, and he'll get 5, 6, sometimes 8, 9 yards. And I think that's going to get the team in more manageable third down situations, which has been a killer for them the past 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, agreed. And to that point, like, just because Mixon can't run under center as well doesn't mean he's a bad running back. The best example is Todd Gurley, who, if you watch Todd Gurley, he's a beast out of outside zone, but for whatever reason, he doesn't do well inside zone, and that's just a little bit. It's just a little intricacies in the running game where as long as Mixon is good in some place, they should just use him there. And I get that, like in modern day, like passing the ball is just more efficient than running the ball. But if you don't have the offensive line to pass protect, you might as well just lean on a solid running game where you're going to have success. And I think the Bengals have that, and they just need to do it.
Yep. We're going to get out of here with one quick, because we have the return of Scott Schulze. We're going to get out of here with one quick, just kind of general fantasy football question. Scott, and Scott, in case you remember, is our resident fantasy football expert. Last year, I was pounding my chest because I won my league. This year, I am a cellar dweller, my friend. Some of it has to do with injury. Some of it had to do with I took some big gambles on guys like Eifert, Josh Gordon, John Ross. Late round, mind you, late round. But it's been a bit of a gamble. Who are some guys now, or even if defense kickers, whoever, who are some players now, maybe Amari Cooper, now that he's on Dallas, some guys that you think, hey, waiver wire pickup, this is a guy who could salvage your season as you're midway through the year?
Well, I guess it's really not a great answer because a lot of it depends on who's available in your league. I mean, There's a lot of different leagues, and some are, guys who tend to be a little more savvy. And so any name I mention is going to be taken.
Or trade. If they're not free agents, maybe trade.
And that's not too, like, if you read any of these articles where like, oh, grab this guy, he's only owned in like 25% of leagues. I tend to be in those leagues where like they're the 25% and those are the guys that are never available.
Yeah.
But that being said, usually the best, I'll give you a rule of thumb and then maybe give you a couple names as maybe like some really, really deep, desperate guys, depending if you have like a really deep roster. But a general rule of thumb that I've used historically has been you can't score points if you are not getting touches. So for me, the biggest thing is when you're looking at adding a guy maybe on waivers, maybe someone who is out there because he's underperformed or hasn't done a lot, is the guys who maybe are getting a lot of targets in the passing game, but just aren't, for whatever reason, haven't converted that to a bunch of points yet. I mean, obviously a touchdown's worth a lot more than, a catch and yardage, but those are very fluky. And so what'll happen is early in the year, the guys who, get all their touchdowns front loaded in the season are going to be the guys who are getting scooped up in waivers, and the guys who maybe are getting a lot of targets are getting a high snap count percentage, who are used a lot in the passing game, but aren't necessarily getting those touchdowns right now. Those are the guys who are going to be available. So as a rule of thumb, those are the guys I generally target. And like anything else, it's not 100% foolproof, but generally the guys who are getting snaps, are getting on the field, are getting targets, are getting looks. Those are the guys who at the end of the day, at the end of week 17, and you're all done, and you look at their numbers, you're like, yeah, that guy was available. He was out there. That was someone maybe I should have grabbed when he was available. And just a couple names that are coming to mind, because this is kind of just like shooting from the hip. But those guys coming back from injury, like Jack Doyle, who was a low TE tight end, maybe high tight end too, kind of a guy. But depending on what your situation is, he's kind of been passed up on as far as people's perspective, because Eric Abrams been doing so good. But one of the reasons Abrams been doing so well is because Doyle's been hurt. Doyle's coming back. He's probably available. He might be a desperation grab. Another really deep guy is Traquan Smith. Don't know if anyone knows who that is, but he is a receiver for the Saints. And now with Ted Ginn on IR, he's supposed to be their the next guy up. And his snap counts have kind of shown it the last couple of weeks that he is basically stepping in that role. And I mean, I wouldn't say he should be your top receiver, but he's someone to look at. Another guy, there's so many guys. I could just sit here and name a million names. The problem is it just depends on who's available in your league. And as far as you mentioned defense, one thing I'm a big believer in drafting defenses really late, last round or even after that. And the main reason is because it's all based on touchdowns, and defensive touchdowns are super fluky. And this is the time of year when, teams have cut a defense because they went on a bye or, something happened. And I'm a big believer kind of looking at, okay, who are they playing the next 3-4 weeks? Who is this defense line up against? And this team, like if you find that defense that has some really good matchups that maybe got cut or maybe isn't the best defense, because at the end of the day, you could take the NFL's best defense and the NFL's like 15th best defense on any given week in fantasy. The 15th best defense or 20th is just as likely to score points for you as that first best defense, because it's all based on interceptions. And you tip a ball, you get interception, you get a fluky touchdown, like the 2 touchdowns the Bengals had against the Dolphins. I mean, you really can't account for that on any defensive metric or project that. You can't really project, that Sam Hubbard and Michael Johnson are going to run in and get you 12 points in fantasy. So with defenses, that's a nice way to steal points, is kind of, and that way you're not hoarding roster spots. And some people like to have 2 defenses because they like to me, that's just wasting roster spots. So just kind of, I don't know, they call it defensive streaming, where you just kind of go week by week. Another thing, if you're, depending on the league, one thing also look at doing, if your starting quarterback is past your bye, if he's a good quarterback, you may not need 2 quarterbacks, because some people are going to keep 2 quarterbacks on their team. And in doing that, you're kind of wasting a roster spot. And I'm a big believer you can never have enough running backs, because you never know who's going to get hurt. You never, kind of like you look at the Patriots, they lost Rex Burkhead. They put Sonny Michel out there. Well, now Sonny Michel's hurt. And now it's, someone like Kenjon Barner or James White is going to get more touches. Well, those guys may have been available a few weeks ago, because guys like Burkhead and Sonny Michel were getting all the love before Burkhead got hurt. And but if you were using that roster spotter on a second quarterback and a second defense, well, you missed out on the opportunity to kind of scarf up those or scoop up those extra guys when you could. So, big believer of hoarding running backs, like that. Michael Douglas, one of them, says greed is good. When it comes to running backs, greed is good. And yeah, kind of keep the positions you need and look for opportunity. It's a lot of guys will make waiver picks chasing points from a week or 2 ago because the guy gets, backup tight end gets 2 fluky catches for touchdowns in the 4th quarter, and everyone goes and grabs him, and he hasn't scored a touchdown the whole rest of the year. Instead, I tend to chase the guy that, okay, who's the tight end that he got a bunch of looks maybe in the red zone, or maybe had 7 or 8 targets 2-3 weeks in a row, but it just didn't work out. But this guy is going to get his when it's all said and done. Those are the guys I guess I'd say I'd be more likely to grab. So I guess it's more of a principle than a specific name.
Yeah, and I'll say this for me, Philip Lindsay was a good little week 2, week 3 waiver wire pickup. He was a guy that was just floating out there, and all of a sudden I picked him up. So thanks for the fantasy football info, Scott. Good to have you back. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, Art19, and Cincy Jungle. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Our thanks to Gene Thomas of Buck What You Heard podcast. He was awesome. He brought some great knowledge, and looking forward to this Sunday. We're so glad to have you with us. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to get out of here. My thanks to Scott Schulze, who rejoined us. Hopefully you make it a more regular thing, my friend, and to John Sheeran, my co-host, as well. Hey, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you to all of our listeners. We'll see you next time.